Hello and welcome, friends, to the Roman world of Julius Caesar, written by none other than the famous playwright in the history of English literature, William Shakespeare. We are on Act Third, Scene Third, and after Scene Third, we're going to do the analysis of the whole Act Third. It's presented by me, Palak Sharma. Few things about me, you can have a read, and once you're done viewing the lesson and the series, please rate, review, recommend, and share the lessons. Do not forget the 3 R's. And here's my URL. You can follow me in Unacademy. Now, Act Third and Scene Third. Here we are. Now, Cinna the poet, not Cinna the conspirator in this case, he's unable to sleep that night. We have already seen that Caesar is assassinated, and there are other senators, the conspirators. They are roaming around the streets of Rome shouting liberty, freedom, tyranny is dead, and they are just shouting aloud, and they think that they have initiated an era of freedom for Rome. But actually, what it is, the case, what the case actually is, we'll come to know later. But we now know that the whole Rome is in chaos right now. So here it is Act Third and Scene Third. So we see that Cinna the poet, he's not the conspirator Cinna, mind you, he is the poet Cinna. The name is same. So he's unable to sleep that night, and so he's wandering through the streets of Rome, and he's confused what to do because he couldn't get anything. It's like a writer's block for him. So some plebeians, the common people over here, they find him. They're already going wild after Antony's speech, which has infuriated them, instigated them. So they find him and they demand to know who he is and what he's doing on the street. They ask him because poets and all these people, they are quite elitely dressed. They are not dressed like normal people. They have an aristocracy in their dressing. So the plebeians, they are actually already instigated. So they wanted to inquire to everyone who is dressed nicely that if they were a conspirator in Caesar's death or not. So they asked Cinna the poet what was he doing. So he tells them that he's going to Caesar's funeral as a friend of Caesar. So when they ask him his name, he just tells him that his name is Cinna. The plebeians just cry out that tear him to pieces. He's a conspirator. So Cinna even tries responding. He says, I'm Cinna the poet. I'm not Cinna the conspirator. I'm Cinna the poet. I'm Cinna the poet. He keeps on saying, but they attack him anyway and then they carry him away somewhere. Don't know where they kill him actually. So that's done with Act Third, Scene Third. So we have completed the whole act now. Scene First, Scene Second, and Scene Third. So here we move to the analysis of this whole act. Now, the image of Caesar throughout this play, it is like that of constancy and greatness, because Caesar himself exclaimed, he says it in the Act Third, Scene Second, that but I am constant as the northern star. And he also says, hence will thou lift up Olympus. He compares himself to Olympus, that would you lift Olympus up? So that way you cannot even lift Caesar up. So even Cassius angrily he compares Caesar to the Colossus. Now Colossus was a person who was very giant. So the word we use nowadays, colossal, it is derived from the earlier person, Roman person who was known as Colossus. So he says that Cassius says in comparing Caesar to Colossus, he says, why man he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus, and we petty men walk under his huge legs and peep about. So he says that we are not petty men walking under the feet of this great man. We can walk beside him. We are as good as him. So there's no issue like we are smaller, but still he makes us feel like we are smaller. We are petty men walking under his huge legs, and we're just peeping about. We are in no control of ourselves and the Roman Empire itself. So because that's the reason that when Caesar falls, the whole Rome is in chaos. Everything, the world falls into chaos. There's no one able to replace Caesar's power immediately after he's dead. So anarchy reigns. Anarchy is when someone is not there in authority to rule the country or rule the empire. So there's anarchy reigning. And until we have Octavius, who will eventually come and he will seize the power in the final lines of the play. But presently, we do not have anyone in power. So, but what we'll see is that Caesar's greatest flaw in this play has been his refusal to acknowledge his own mortality. He is not acknowledging, he's not accepting that he can be a mortal person. He's often referring to himself in third person, as we saw. So he develops a sense of greatness and godliness in himself, which actually distracts him from taking the proper decisions, and he taking kind of proper precautions. So even we see that Artemidorus tries to hand him a note. He warns him about the dangers of the conspirator, but Caesar just refuses because Artemidorus informs him that the note is personal. So he just says it again that what touches us ourselves shall be served last. So we cannot touch something which is our own personal thing because that is to be served last. Firstly, we need to serve the nation. Then comes our own private needs. So we see that in the quest of becoming a great person, Caesar eventually led his own downfall. And now we can see that the moment immediately after Caesar's death, these are highly ironic moments, I will call them, because the murderers cry out, liberty, freedom, and tyranny is dead. But actually, what happened is that they have committed an extra legal act by assassinating Caesar. So what they have done is they have hampered liberty, and instead they are shouting out that we have got liberty, and yet then I now crying out in the name of liberty. And the next thing they do is they dip their blood in Caesar's hand. So Caesar is dead over here, and the dream which Calpurnia saw, it's turning real. So they dip their hands in Caesar's blood, and Brutus even, he instigates them again. That's two Romans, stoop, and let us bathe our hands in Caesar's blood up to the elbows and besmear our swords. Then walk we forth even to the marketplace, and waving our red weapons over our heads, let's all cry out, peace, freedom, and liberty. So it's ironic in itself that you're killing someone and then you're saying it'll be peaceful. Killing people is never peaceful. That's the rule. That's the law. So now even Cassius remarks that how many ages hence shall this our lofty scene be acted over, in states unborn and accents yet unknown? That we have done such a great deal of goodness, that we have done such a great feat, that in many languages, in many states, people will be recreating the scene. So these lines, they are alluding to Shakespeare's retelling of Julius Caesar's story. That means that it has been such a great act that even Shakespeare is telling it again and again. And these were even used during French Revolution, because there was simultaneous expression of grotesque death in Rome in French Revolution, because there were people dying and they were rallying and they were literally crying peace, freedom, and liberty. So it is kind of a personification of French Revolution as well. So Brutus and the other conspirators, they fail to grasp the actual hypocrisy of their actions. They do not realize that they are being hypocrites when they are doing the ironical stuff like killing someone and then crying out peace. Now we see that Mark Antony, he doesn't believe the conspirators are justified when they're crying out peace, and he's the first one to condemn their action. So when Antony says that let each man render me his bloody hand, he's actually marking them for revenge rather than celebrating their actions or signing a pact with them. Because even Trebunius, who did not stab Caesar, he did not stab Caesar literally, but prevented Antony from protecting him. He just sent him out. But even Antony marks Trebonius also. He didn't have any role to play in killing Caesar, but still, what he did is that Antony shakes his hand with Trebonius last. He initially shakes hand with every conspirator who killed Caesar, and then at last he shakes hands with Trebonius. Actually, what he does is he transfers Caesar's blood, which he collected from previous handshakes, and he transferred that blood to Trebonius's clean hands. So he's making even Trebonius guilty. He's marking him also. So Antony marked every killer, every conspirator. At this moment, Antony is symbolizing authority, the non-recognition of authority, the anarchy which is taking place. He's blaming the conspirators and he's marking them for revenge, because he shows his taste for chaos when finally he's left alone with Caesar's body, and when he says, "Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth, that I am meek and gentle with these butchers." And his final words in this stanza, it indicate his goals. He states that domestic fury and fierce civil strife shall cumber all the parts of Italy. Now, indeed, anarchy does rule by the final scene of Act 3rd, in which, in a sense, another poet is killed, because his namesake was one of the murderers. Now, this scene in which the plebeians, they are unwilling to listen to Cinna, this expresses the death of not only order, it's also the end of literature, it's also the end of reason in the Roman Empire. Cinna even cries out that I am Cinna the poet, at which the crowd simply changes its charges from killing to, they say that, okay, now you are Cinna the poet, then tear him for his bad verses. He writes bad, then tear him for that. So there's even end of literature and end of reason in this case. The death of Cinna is an attack on men of words and literature, and it marks the first time a poet, which is often an icon of political rebellion, he is ignored. So later on in this play, a poet even tries to separate Brutus and Cassius when they are fighting and having an argument. But even that time, the poet is ignored and he's sent away. So perhaps with these examples, Shakespeare is asking the audience to give more weightage to the work of poets and writers in the worldly affairs. So it's a way. That's all we can say. Then critics often points out that Brutus did some tactical errors which led to his eventual loss. So Brutus's first grave mistake was allowing Mark Antony to live. However, his greatest mistake was not just allowing him to live, but allowing Antony to speak to the people. That was his biggest failure. Cassius's fears were justified when Antony actually turned the crowd against the conspirators, Cassius, Brutus, Cinna, everyone. And furthermore, what happens is that Brutus leaves Antony alone with the crowd. And he thereby loses all the control of the situation in this case. And Antony realizes the nature of the people he's dealing with. And he tells the crowd that you are not wood, you are not stones, but men. And this is exactly in contrast with Murillus in the very first scene, who calls the crowd, as we can remember, you blocks, you stones, you worse than senseless thing. So it is exactly in contrast that Antony is trying to be so good. He's candy coating the public, and Murillus and all those people, Flavius, who were against Caesar and who were a part of a conspiracy. They are the people who are calling the plebeians stone and blockheads. They are insulting the public, and Antony is raising them up on a pedestal. So of course they'll go with the one who's raising them. So we can see that Antony is able to influence the crowd because he actually flatters them and he uses repetition and poetry. This is important, that he is using repetition and poetry to drive his points home. And with this careful manipulation, Antony is actually overcoming Brutus because he instead addressed the crowd in prose. He's saying simple prose. He's using syllogisms. He's using logic. And although a powerful speaker, Antony actually relies on Caesar's body and will. The will he has from Caesar's documents or what. He tries to win the crowd over with the help of Caesar's body and his will. So Antony realizes that it's Caesar's body which will do wonders here. And thus the audience see the continual influence Caesar maintains over events. Even after his death, Caesar is the one who's regulating the things. And Antony says that he would put a tongue in every wound of Caesar that should move the stones of Rome to rise and mutiny. So again and again we can see that the people of Rome are stones. They do not have any attachment to any kind of stuff, any kind of people. They are not attached to the conspirators because they once said that Brutus live. And the other time they are not even attached to Caesar because they called him ambitious. So they are simply stones. And Antony has the power to even turn the stones of Rome in rise and mutiny. So here we have set up the whole arrangement for revenge, and now we are on the path of revenging. So we'll see that what Antony does actually, and how with the help of Octavius he'll be teaching a lesson to these conspirators, and how the conspirators fight among themselves, and what will finally lead to the downfall of Rome or the downfall of the conspirators. That we'll see in the later act 4th. So yeah, that's it. Thank you. Rate, review, recommend, and share the lesson. Have a nice day.